Try that. Yes. Prayed quite a lot about what to preach on my last Sunday with you guys. I've really loved it. Love being here. I feel like defecting from my own church to come here, but I'm not allowed to do that. I met Jesus personally when I was 15. And ever since that time, he's put something on my heart that has never left me through all my years of ministry. And that's a heart for lost people. And so that's what I want to talk about today. And I want to talk about, I've entitled this, The Preoccupation of God. But before I talk about that, I want to ask you, what preoccupies you? Think about it. Where does your mind drift to when you're not doing anything? What do you daydream about? Some of you, the only time you get to sit still is in church, and that's probably what you're doing right now, is daydreaming about something else. Now, you can know a lot about a person by what they think about when they're sitting around and doing, quote, doing nothing. An entrepreneur eats and sleeps his or her business. An avid coach is always thinking about how to get better performance out of his athletes. A young mum is always thinking about her kids. You can take her away to a hotel for a romantic weekend without the kids, and she's still thinking about the fact that the house is burning down or the kids have been kidnapped. Right? What does God think about all day? What preoccupies him? Where does his mind drift? Now, we can know the answer to that question because of Jesus. Jesus is the Word who became flesh. He is the mind of God revealed in the flesh. So it's pretty easy to figure out the preoccupation of God by looking at Jesus and seeing the way he lived, seeing what he taught, the things he said. And Jesus, if we couldn't figure it out from the way Jesus taught and the way he lived, we can figure it out easily because he summarized it all in one sentence, which we find in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, verse 10. He said, "For the Son of Man," he was referring to himself, "the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost." Jesus revealed to humanity that the mind of God always moves towards lost people. He told these stories about a shepherd whose mind was on his one lost sheep. He told a story about a woman who was obsessed with finding one lost coin. He told a story about a father who was so preoccupied with his one lost son that he kept scanning the horizon, longing for him to come back into his embrace. And the God that Jesus reveals is a God who is preoccupied with finding every lost human being who will let themselves be found and brought back home. Right at the beginning of the Bible, we read the story of Adam, who's hiding from God because of his sin. And God asks a question. He says, "Adam, where are you?" Now, it wasn't as though God didn't know where Adam was. He was letting Adam know that he wanted him back in a relationship with him. That's the way God's mind runs all the time. He's preoccupied with lost people. I have a close friend who's mad about cricket. And for a while, Lynn and I were living with them, and his wife Trudy was pregnant, heavily pregnant, and we were living in their house with them, and Trudy went into labor. And women, you're going to love this story. While she was having contractions, he was listening to the cricket with the transistor radio. I know that they don't have those anymore. He had it up to his ear, and I had to take him aside and say, put the flipping radio down and get your wife to the hospital. She's going to have a baby now. Now, here's the thing. This couple had 3 boys. Guess what those 3 boys are mad about? Cricket. In fact, one of them was a rep for one of the provinces. You see, the preoccupation of the father got passed on to the children. And God is our Father. And his concerns, his preoccupation needs to be ours. If God has a huge, huge heart for lost people, and Jesus came to save those who are lost, then his preoccupation needs to be our preoccupation. We need to learn to live the way Jesus did. Now, when you were a little kid, did you learn a traffic safety song? Think about it. I'm not going to ask you to sing it. I'm going to try and sing the one that I learned. Be interesting to see if any of you learnt this one. What do you do before you cross the street? You stop and look and listen. What do you do before you use your feet? You stop and look and listen. Who learnt that? Yep. Some of it, yeah, we're all of the same generation. How many of you learnt something similar that is a stop, look, and listen song or ditty? Gee, you guys are going to be dangerous on the road. Wow, you need to teach your kids that. I want to take that little song and take those 3 words and use them as a reminder for us to live the way Jesus lived. First one, stop. In Mark's Gospel, chapter 5, we read of a man named Jairus whose daughter is dying, and he pleads with Jesus to come. So Jesus is like the ambulance with the flashing lights and the siren going. He's on an emergency call to a dying girl. And he gets interrupted by a woman who's been constantly bleeding for 12 years. One is a life and death situation. The other is one that can wait. But Jesus stops. And he stops so long to meet the need of the woman in front of him that Jairus' daughter dies. Now, because we know the end of the story, we think, oh, that's not really a problem because we know that Jesus went to Jairus' daughter and he raised her from the dead. But people didn't know that then. And many times in his ministry, Jesus stopped what he was doing to meet the needs of lost people. His life was full of interruptions. And often those interruptions were God appointments which resulted in people being made whole. Blind Bartimaeus, the leper who interrupted him and Jesus healed him. His interruption over a meal at a Pharisee's home when a sinful woman came weeping and washing his feet with her tears and drying his feet with her hair. And he stopped what he was doing and forgave her. Imagine the miracles that would have been missed if Jesus hadn't been available to be interrupted. How well do you handle interruptions? They're part of our everyday life. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said this: "We must be ready to allow ourselves to be interrupted by God. God will constantly be crossing our paths and cancelling our plans by sending us people with claims and requests. And when we bypass people God has put in our way, like the priest who bypassed the man in need in the story of the Good Samaritan, we are bypassing the visible sign of the cross that's been put in our way to show us that it's not our way, but God's way that must be done." Tomorrow, or maybe even this afternoon, God is going to interrupt you. It may be a phone call. It may be a knock at the door. It may be a person with a flat tire. It might be a young mother struggling with a preschooler. It might be an old person at the supermarket. It might be a client at work. It might be a person of another culture who can't speak English very well. It may even be someone in your own family. And God's going to interrupt you. Watch for it. Because it may well be a divine intervention, a divine appointment, where God is saying to you, stop. Now that doesn't mean that every time anyone interrupts me, I have to stop what I'm doing and do whatever they want. Doesn't mean that attention deficit disorder is some sort of deep form of spirituality and I ought to be interrupted all the time. But it does mean that if I'm trying to live like Jesus, seeking lost people, I'm going to see those interruptions differently. And if you and I can train ourselves to stop, we will discover people who are lost. People who need to meet Jesus. So the preoccupation of Jesus was to seek and to save those who are lost. Stop. Second thing, look. In Jericho, Jesus encountered Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector. And you know the story. Zacchaeus was very rich. But he was a short little guy and he couldn't see over the crowd and he wanted to see Jesus, so he climbs up a tree so that he can see Jesus. Now, Jesus spent a lot of his time with the poor and the disadvantaged, the people that we would call the down and outs, but Zacchaeus wasn't a down and out, he was an up and out. Literally up the tree and out. But even though he was very rich, he was still lost. And here is Jesus. He's swarmed by people all around him. But he looks up. And he sees Zacchaeus up his tree. You know, sometimes we are crowded by people and we need to look beyond our immediate circumstances to see what other people don't see. And it's so easy to get wrapped up with the people that we know and we love. And we miss the people that are on the edge. There are heaps of people like Zacchaeus all around us. Lonely people, people who've been shunned by society, awkward people who don't fit. And we either see them or we don't see them. If we see them, we often don't know what to do with them. So we look the other way. But if we're going to be like Jesus, we need to develop the skill of looking for people who are lost. And you and I are children of a Father who longs for lost people to be found. And when we do what God does and go looking for lost people, that brings great joy to the heart of our Father. when the preoccupation of God becomes our preoccupation and we begin to live more like Jesus, that brings great joy to the heart of the Father. Learn to stop. Learn to look and listen. Recently, Lynn and I sat in on an Alpha course. And for those of you that don't know about an Alpha course is an opportunity for people to discover who Jesus is and what the Christian faith is all about. Now, the key thing, if you've ever been a leader on an Alpha course, the key thing on an Alpha course is not to tell the people on the course everything that you know about Jesus. The key thing is to shut up and listen. Because people on an Alpha course are free to ask any question they like and to say whatever they think. But too many of us as Christians don't know how to shut up and listen. We want to jump in with all the answers, especially if we're sure that they're wrong and we're right. In Mark chapter 10, we read the story of Jesus and Bartimaeus. I want to read it to you. Then they reached Jericho, and as Jesus and his disciples left town, a large crowd followed him. A blind beggar named Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, was sitting beside the road. When Bartimaeus heard that Jesus of Nazareth was nearby, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." "Be quiet," many of the people yelled at him. But he only shouted louder, "Son of David, have mercy on me." When Jesus heard him, he stopped and said, "Tell him to come here." So they called the blind man. "Cheer up," they said. "Come on, he's calling you." Bartimaeus threw aside his coat, jumped up, and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked. "My rabbi," the blind man said, "I want to see." And Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has healed you." Instantly the man could see, and he followed Jesus down the road. In this story, we see Jesus doing all three things. He stops. He looks, and he sees Bartimaeus. And he listened. He didn't say to Bartimaeus, "I know what you need," even though he's blind. He asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" We need to listen to people so that they feel heard. Because when we listen, people are much more open to hearing about Jesus. Not just listening to people, but learning to listen to the Holy Spirit. You ever been in a situation where you have been praying for lost people, or you begin your day and you ask the Lord to lead you to lost people, and then you find the Spirit of God prompting you during the day? Maybe that you're incredibly busy and the Spirit of God just says to you, "Stop." Or it's an interruption. And the Spirit of God says, "Stop." Or he may say to you, "Look, look." And you see someone you would normally have missed, someone who's lost, who needs to be introduced to Jesus. Or he may sometimes speak to you as he speaks to me sometimes and says, "Shut up. Be quiet and just listen. Listen to this person's heart cry for help. Don't feed them a whole lot of trite Christian formulas. Listen. And if you listen, you'll understand what I'm already doing in their life." When we stop, when we look, and when we listen, we become like Jesus, who said, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save those who are lost." True story. On Nantucket Island in Massachusetts in the USA, there is a shipwreck and life-saving museum. And because that area of the coast is rocky and the weather's often wild and fog obscures vision, there have been lots and lots of shipwrecks on that coast. They reckon that over 700 sailing ships were wrecked on that coast. So many lives were lost that a group of volunteers decided to become lifesavers. It wasn't their job. They were all volunteers, but they banded together to become the Massachusetts Humane Society. And they built little huts. They used their own money and they built little huts along the shore, and they had boats in these huts and life-saving equipment. And they had people on duty watching the sea all the time, on the lookout for ships going down, for people who needed to be saved, for people who were in distress. Because they decided they wanted to try and save every life they could. They didn't do it for recognition. They did it in addition to their jobs. They did it because they believed that every life was precious and valuable. And to remind each other of what was at stake and how seriously they had to take this task, they had a motto. Here's the motto. You have to go out. You don't have to come back. Wow. Imagine that as a motto. Children's ministry leaders, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. Wow, great recruiting slogan, eh? You have to go out, but you don't have to come back. And these people risked their lives to save people they'd never met. On 31st of March, 1879, there was a violent storm that swept across Nantucket Sound, and it brought powerful winds, freezing rain, snow, and heavy fog. And by dawn on the 1st of April, 1879, there were 68 ships that lay wrecked or disabled on that coastline around the island. And in that violent storm, one lifeboat crew rowed their boat in the storm for 32 hours without a break. And they rescued 40 sailors. Was it worth it? Of course it was. But you know, over time, things changed. The United States Coast Guard was formed, and they began to take this task over. And for a period of time, the Coast Guard and the Life-Saving Society worked side by side, but eventually the idea spread, we ought to let the professionals do it. They are better trained and they get paid for it. And eventually the volunteers stopped searching the coastline, looking for sinking ships. They stopped sending out teams to rescue drowning people. But the funny thing is, they couldn't bring themselves to disband, even though they were no longer involved in the life-saving business. They kept meeting in the city of Boston. They kept having dinners together. They told stories of past rescues. They handed out awards for community service. They continued to enjoy each other's company and have good fellowship together. They just weren't in the life-saving business anymore. It happens all the time. It doesn't happen in a day or a month or a year. But over time, a church or a ministry forgets that it's in the life-saving business. It usually doesn't disband. People still meet. They enjoy each other's company. They have good fellowship together. They tell stories of past rescues. They sing songs about how good it is to have been rescued themselves. They have dinners together. They have services and programs. They may even be involved in some form of community activity, but they're not looking out for people who are going down. Nobody's watching. They're not scouring their offices and their schools and their neighborhoods and their networks to see if there's someone who needs to be saved. They're not regularly praying for lost people. They forget that Jesus put his rescue effort into the hands of volunteers. They have buildings and budgets and staff and meetings. They're just not in the life-saving business anymore. It's unbelievably sad. And it can happen. It can happen to a church. It can happen to a connect group or a small group. It can happen to a children's ministry or a youth ministry. It can happen to an individual. Don't think it can't happen here. And whether we stay in the life-saving business is in the hands of the people who are gathered here today. Jesus came to seek and to save those who are lost.